I did the only thing my body would let me do, which was nothing. I lay there with my eyes barely open and I waited for my own light to come on, and it didn't. The light of light under the door stayed exactly where it was. The pause stretched out past 5 seconds, past 10, past 20, and the light never reached my room, and there was never any sound of anyone leaving. I stayed like that until the windows started going gray with the morning fog. When I finally got up, the cabin was lit up like it was hosting a party, every bulb burning, and the kitchen chair was pulled out again, turned toward the window. I'd like to say I left right then, but I didn't. Not immediately. I spent that day half convinced I'd dreamed the whole sequence, that I'd imagined the order of it, that the lights had come on while I was actually asleep and my mind had stitched a story around them after the fact. The brain does that. I know it does. I drank coffee on the porch and watched the fog sit on the water, and I talked myself most of the way back to normal. The problem was that some part of me, a quiet and certain part, had decided. I packed slowly that afternoon without really admitting to myself that I was packing. I went to bed that third night with my clothes on and my keys in my pocket and the bedroom light left on purpose, because I wanted to be the one who decided it was on. I woke at 3 and my light was off. I didn't wait to see what came on next. I went out the bedroom window rather than the door, which I'm not proud of, and I walked to the car in the dark, feeling the whole back of my neck the entire way, and I drove out down that gravel track too fast for the conditions with the fog so thick my headlights just bounced back at me. I didn't feel safe until I hit pavement and saw another set of taillights ahead of me, some stranger driving home, a normal person in a normal car, and I followed those lights all the way to the highway like they were the only real thing left in the world. When I gave Daniel his key back a few days later, I tried to bring it up casually. I told him the lights in the cabin had a habit of coming on by themselves at night and asked if there was something funny with the wiring he should know about. I was hoping, I think, that he'd say yes, that it was a known thing, a documented fault, that an electrician had been out and shaken his head at it, something I could file the memory under. He laughed instead. He said that was his grandfather all over. He told me the old man had this routine every single night of his life, where he'd get up in the small hours and walk the whole cabin and turn on every light, room by room, and check the doors and the windows, and then go back to bed. Something he'd carried home from the war, Daniel said, the need to know the whole place was lit and that nothing was hiding in the dark. The family used to tease him about it. Daniel said it almost fondly, the way you talk about the small, strange habits of someone you loved. I didn't say anything to that. I just nodded and handed over the key, because Daniel's grandfather had died 6 years before I ever set foot in that cabin, and I could tell from the way Daniel told the story, smiling, looking off at nothing, that it had genuinely never once occurred to him that the man wasn't there to do it anymore. I never told him the lights still came on. I'm not sure why. Maybe I didn't want to take the warmth out of the way he remembered his grandfather. Maybe I just didn't want to be the person who said it out loud and made it real. I think about it more than I'd like to. Not the lights, really. The order of them. The patience of whatever it was, moving through those rooms at the pace of a tired old man making his rounds, turning everything on so nothing could hide. And I think about the one room it always came toward, and always stopped just outside of, and never entered. The room with me in it. I've never decided whether that means it didn't know I was there, or whether it knew exactly, and that was the whole point, that it walked the whole house every night, lit every corner, checked every door, made certain nothing was hiding in the dark, and found me anyway. I don't tell this to many people, because there's no good way to make it land as anything. Nothing happened in the way people mean when they ask what happened. Nobody touched me. I drove away in one piece with all my things, and I never got hurt. But there are still 5 or 6 nights a year where I wake up sometime around 3 and just lie there in the dark, listening, and for a second or two I'm back in that cabin before I remember where I actually am. This was about 9 years ago now. A friend of mine, I'll call him Daniel, had a place up north that had belonged to his grandfather. It was maybe 3 hours from the city, off the main road, then another 15 minutes down a gravel track that the GPS gave up on entirely. He offered it to me for 2 weeks at the end of October. I'd been working too much and sleeping badly for the better part of a year, and I think he could tell I needed to be somewhere where my phone didn't work and nobody could ask me for anything. He left the key under a planter on the porch and told me the well water was fine to drink and the firewood was already split. That was about the extent of the orientation. The cabin itself was small and solid. 1 main room with a kitchen at one end, a wood stove, 2 bedrooms off a short hallway, a bathroom at the back. There was a lake about 100 yards through the trees, more of a pond, really, and at that time of year the whole property held this low fog in the mornings that didn't burn off until almost noon. The nearest neighbor was a summer place a mile off that had clearly been closed up for the season. I liked it immediately. It was the kind of quiet you can feel in your ears. The first day was uneventful. I unpacked, I walked down to the water, I made dinner and read by the stove until I couldn't keep my eyes open. The electrical setup was old, the kind of cabin where the light switches are those round push-button kind and the bulbs are all warm and yellow, and there's one buzzing fluorescent tube over the kitchen sink that's clearly from a different decade than everything else. Before bed, I went around and turned everything off. I remember doing it specifically because the switches were unfamiliar and I had to feel for each one. I turned off the kitchen, the main room, the hall, and then my bedroom last, and I lay there in complete darkness. There are no streetlights out there. When it's off, it's off. I woke up at 3 in the morning, and every light in the cabin was on. I want to be honest about how that first night actually felt, because it wasn't dramatic. My first real thought wasn't fear. It was something closer to embarrassment, like I'd done something stupid. I lay there blinking at the light coming under my bedroom door and around the edges, and the warm glow of the bulb in my own room above me, and I just thought, asterisk, did I leave all of those on? Asterisk, I genuinely couldn't remember. It had been a long drive. I'd had a glass of wine. Memory is a slippery thing at 3 in the morning. So I told myself I must have flipped them back on out of habit when I got up to use the bathroom, even though I had no memory of getting up. I went around and turned everything off again, and this time I paid attention and I went back to sleep. The next morning I noticed the first small thing, and I almost didn't notice it at all. One of the kitchen chairs was pulled out from the table and turned slightly, facing the window that looked out toward the lake. I'm a tidy person, almost annoyingly so, and I knew I'd pushed all 4 chairs in the night before because I'd wiped the table down. But I'd also been moving around half asleep, and a chair is just a chair. I pushed it back in and made coffee and didn't think about it again until much later. That day I went looking for the breaker box, because the rational explanation I'd settled on was a wiring fault, some short or surge that was kicking the lights on. I found the panel in a closet by the back door. Everything was labeled in faded pencil in old handwriting. Kitchen, main, bath, bed 1, bed 2, pork. Nothing looked wrong. The switches were all firm. I'm not an electrician, but I grew up around a father who fixed everything himself, and nothing about that panel said asterisk fault asterisk to me. Still, I felt better having looked. A bad circuit was something I could believe in. I made a note to mention it to Daniel and I let it go. The second night I woke up before the lights came on. I don't know what woke me. There was no sound that I could point to. I just surfaced out of sleep the way you sometimes do, all at once, completely alert, my eyes already open. The room was dark. I checked my watch. It was a little after 3, maybe 3:08, 3:09, and I lay there in the dark feeling certain, in a way I couldn't explain, that I should keep still. Then the hall light came on. I could see it under the door. Not a flicker, not a surge. Just on. Steady. The way a light comes on when someone pushes the button. And then, a few seconds later, the light in the main room. I could tell because the quality of the glow under the door changed, got warmer and broader. Then the kitchen, and with it that faint electrical buzz of the fluorescent tube over the sink that I'd come to know. Each one came on after the last with a pause between them, maybe 5 or 6 seconds, and the pauses were even, regular. Like someone walking at an unhurried pace from the back of the cabin through the main room into the kitchen, turning on each light as they passed it. And then the lights started coming back the other way, down the hall, toward me. I have tried many times to describe the feeling of lying in that bed, listening to the rooms light up one by one in a sequence that was moving in my direction, and the closest I can get is this. It was the absolute calm of it that frightened me. There was no rush to it. Nothing scrambling nor frantic. Just this patient, even progress, the porch light, then the bath, then the second bedroom across the hall from mine, each one with that same unhurried pause, and the whole time I could not hear a single footstep. The floors in that cabin were old, and they creaked if you so much as shifted your weight. I'd learned the exact board outside the bathroom that groaned, and there was nothing. Just the soft click of buttons I couldn't actually hear so much as feel, and the light growing under my door.